Okay. All right, Matotsopogo. Men Geige Giaili. We are live.
Hafa day, Todo Hamzo, Maila Halam, Maila Halam. Welcome, everyone. Inan Husi Maria Hernandez, and I co-host this series in solidarity with the lovely Teihini Davis. Say Hafa day, sis.
Todos Hamzu, buenas, Mananas y dos. At least for me, I know it's noon, but I just woke up not too long ago, so here's my coffee. Um,
Manana Sitsu.
Grateful,
This is our,
excited.
yes.
This is a
Great.
special episode today that we have. Viva. Maria, would you like to tell us why today is a especially special episode?
Today is especially special. We're so excited. We have a full panel of amazing water and land protectors and community leaders from across the Mariana Islands for this. This is actually the first official episode of In Solidarity. We had training wheels on the last one with Maguette kind of guiding us through. This is our first one, training wheels off. We're ready for In Solidarity, and today's episode is a continuation of a militarization panel that we had during a regional conference that our organization helped to put on a Micronesia Climate Change Alliance alongside a few other amazing community organizations. And we have my co-director, Muñeca de Oro, with MCC on, who can share a little bit about the conference. But this episode is really a continuation of the conversation around the impacts of militarization, how militarization manifests today across the islands, and how we really can work together to counter the violence that we're experiencing to our lands and to our waters. So the way that we're going to do this, Sis Heaney, we talked about just kind of going around the room first and introducing ourselves. So shall we popcorn it off, Heaney? To maybe we'll have Muñeca de Oro introduce yourself first, sis, and kind of share a little bit about what making waves was, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. Go ahead.
Hungan.
Sure. Half a day, Toru Hamzu, Tiro. My name is Manyaka Di Oro. I'm the co-executive director and co-founder of the Micronesia Climate Change Alliance. And our organization was formed in 2018, right after Super Typhoon Yutu made landfall on Tinian and Saipan. That was October 2018, so almost 10 years ago. And that typhoon was a big wake-up call. It was a megastorm that formed really quickly, and then it necessitated a lot of on-the-ground mutual aid work, and there was just billions of dollars of loss in economic loss and for the Northern Mariana Islands. And at that point, Guam hasn't had a storm in a few years, but there's so much more climate related issues happening on our island that we noticed that wasn't being talked about in our local legislature on Guåhan and in the CNMI. And so MCCA formed specifically to galvanize more leadership from the community and within our elected officials to take climate change seriously. And Making Waves was a conference that first came to our islands. It's a conference designed for us and by us in the Marianas. And the first conference was in 2022. And it brought together folks from all of our islands to Guam, where we talked about the just transition. And the just transition is a framework for understanding how the economics of the world today, being capitalism and a system that's extractive, needs to be changed, and how that's the root cause of not only climate change, but of settler colonialism and militarization, and how all of these interlocking issues share the same root cause of having an economic system that's based on power and greed. And so the first conference brought about 40 people from 29 different organizations, and we met at the Guam Museum in late 2022. And since then, we've held 3 more conferences. In 2023, it was amazing. We brought over 150 people together, and we also had folks from the Philippines and from Puerto Rico and from Hawaii and Okinawa, and Japan to come together to also talk about militarization and the need for peace in our communities. And these were all folks who have dealt with militarization firsthand. And so we came up with a declaration at that conference with 150 people there from throughout the region, even from the Marshall Islands and from the FSM, also joined in with us. And then in 2023, we had another Making Waves conference. So we do this every year around October, September. 2023, we looked specifically at what's called the Just Recovery Framework, and we had folks who do resiliency hub and mutual aid work post-disasters. And this was after MCCA was really activated after Typhoon Mawar. Made landfall and devastated a lot of our northern islands. So we brought together people from Texas, from Florida, from Flint, Michigan, who also do disaster response and also do recovery work in their communities, just so that we could learn from one another and help one another strengthen our systems of being responders and being responders in a way that's just and informed directly from our community. And that was in 2024. And then this last conference, and again, we're going to do this every single year. So we hope people listening out there stay tuned and join us in our next few conferences. But this last one was extra special because it was the first one that we ever held in the Northern Mariana Islands. It was held in Saipan, and it was themed around repairing nets and building trust. And all of our conferences always include representatives from Rota, Saipan, and Tinian. And this one was specifically around how do we navigate conflict and how do we repair our communities from conflict, especially within movement spaces. It gets really hard. This work is really tough, and a lot of times it's unpaid work. And so how do we build a movement that honors everyone's labor and honors our relationships and put our relationships first? Because it's so important that as we demand of our elected officials locally, regionally, and nationally for peace and demand diplomacy, that we practice that and that we embody that within and for our communities, and that we move with each other in kind and compassionate ways. And so this conference was especially beautiful as it was held in Saipan, and that we were very intentionally tender with one another and intentionally putting care as a forefront of what we wanted to do in our time together. So we did a lot of healing work and a lot of really productive conversations around how do we move forward, even though all this harm is happening. And so this conversation, this panel, was so incredibly powerful, and I'm excited that they have this opportunity to continue the conversation, because we had a lot of questions and not a lot of time. And so I'm glad that we are picking up the conversation, because it was incredibly important and many things were raised that we need to stay on top of throughout the Marianas as we face increasing militarization.
Beautifully said, sis. Yeah, we really gathered to build community, to strategize, to deepen our connections, to share knowledge. And we, like Muñeca said, it was a gathering of traditional healers, cultural practitioners, community organizers, and community leaders representing about 20 groups across the Marianas, about 60 different participants, and so special, so much love, and just collective care that everybody showed for each other. And I think we all left feeling very restored. I do want to see, Heini, if you wanted to share any reflections yourself, and then we can pass it off to to our militarization panel, which is one of the two panels that we had at Making Waves. The first one, conflict mediation. The second one, just kind of trying to share a little bit about the ways that we are all collectively across the Marianas. So many people are working together, fighting for our home. We're working together to protect our sacred islands against these harmful systems that really are harming our lands and waters and communities. And you know, I know a lot of people are really you know, interested in tuning in because we want to learn about the impacts across each of the islands. So go ahead, Teihini, if you want to share a little bit, sis, and then we can pass it off to our amazing panelists to share a little bit about why they're here, where they're here, where they're from, and what's going on in their homes.
Okay, sana maasi, Maria, and sana maasi next for sharing that introduction. Beautifully said. I couldn't have put it into better words myself, not just because I'm not really great with words to begin with, but also because I feel like the more that you show up to these things, the more natural it becomes for you to be able to explain it because it's just something that you are passionate about, and it's not just the work that you do, but it's your life. It's a part of our livelihoods. And so I'm really glad that, you know, like she said, we are using this opportunity, the space and time right now to get out some of what we maybe didn't have some time to expand on in Saipan for the conference. Because I'm a firm believer, as many of us are here, that a lot of the work that we do, a lot of like the big, I guess, the substance of the work happens behind the scenes, in our day-to-day lives, in our interpersonal relationships, and the things that aren't always just put on a panel and seen and presented in that kind of a formal setting. And so like I think that those things matter just as much as the work that we do, if not just a little bit more, I guess, because it's one of those things that carries on and makes the work that you do show up for eventually worth it and sustainable. So it's not always ending in like a burnout situation or like a energy depleting kind of way where you're just giving, but not getting really anything out of it because you're not honoring your own pace, you know? And so that's one of the intentions of our In Solidarity podcast is to kind of promote people that are in the line of heart work that we do, but also shed light on the importance of collective and individual self-care, compassion, relationships that help to that we take with us and embody when we are in these organizing spaces that can take a lot from you sometimes if you're not careful. So to finish off on that note before I go popcorning it off on, I just wanted to um, kind of emphasize or expand on what Nick said of you know, the making waves of 2025. They said like you know, you guys host these conferences every year with like if I'm not mistaken, because this year was my first one going to it. Every year has a certain theme that you centralize around. And so this one was about building trust. And I think I wrote it down in my notebook, and I would like for us to keep this in mind for the rest of the Tinghoran fans that it's lost. It's lost. um Basically something along the lines of movements or progress moving at the speed of trust. And that's something that I'm very grateful that all of the guests here, the panelists that were there here, have I know that we have this experience of like knowing what that means on a deep and personal level. So just keeping all of that in mind, I would like to popcorn it off now to Mona Manglona from Luta for Luta. So, Chalusis, if you would like to introduce yourself and just kind of, you know, get the ball rolling of whatever is calling to you to, you know, yeah.
Yeah, no, buenas everyone, half a day. Buenas and half a day to everyone that's listening to the podcast or the live stream. Guahu si Mona Sierra Manglona, Tauta Lutazu. I actually just wrote down the phrase you just said, sis, progress moving at the speed of trust. That really holds true for me. I am just returning home to the Marianas after being away for a decade. And I realize that in a lot of the work I've been doing in just this year alone, trust has been so important as I kind of reintroduce myself to the community and our friends and family here at home, um, and building trust in order to do this work. I recognize um, I guess, a lot of us can relate to this, those who have left home, whether it was for university, education, for work, and then coming back home and having to like unlearn and relearn, what it means to be home, what it means to be in community. So for me, I founded an organization that's still very much in its growing phase called From Luta for Luta or Ginin Luta para Luta. And truly, it was a response to various emerging community needs. And it just so happened that when the idea came about, it was when there was information coming out that there will be military development on the island of Luta. And for those who are familiar here in the Sinamai, the island of Luta, and including Saipan, is one of the islands that has zero military development or presence. And I think in conversations I've had with so many people, when you visit Luta, you feel kind of this gravitational sacred pull to the island and you know, seeing and hearing about the plans that were made really without community input is what almost catapulted from Luta for Luta to become what it is now. And for me to even be in this space with everyone else on this call, I'm still learning so much. So even to be on this panel to talk about what demilitarization means, what it means to protect and care for our islands, I just want to, make it really clear that I'm learning. I'm learning. A lot of this is new to me, but I think that's so important to those who are listening in, who may also be unsure what this means and how they can be involved and engaged and informed. So honestly, yes, building trust. And I hope that through this, we're able to continue building that trust in the work that we're doing, in the message, and the narratives that we're trying to shape for ourselves. So I'm just so grateful, Sainama Aussie, for having me. And I guess I'll popcorn it to Zeno.
Hafide and Zantito, everyone, and everyone listening to the podcast. My name is Zeno Deleon Jr. I guess this is week 2 of Fanatsu having me on the podcast. Don't get tired of me just yet. Um, but I'm here in my capacity as the vice chair for our Commonwealth 670, also known as OCW 670. And I just really want to shout out my amazing board of directors, right? And the history I want to highlight really is with OCW, we're one of the only groups in the CNMI that are raising awareness about the actions and the impacts of militarism and militarization in the Marianas. Um, and the thing about OCW is that, it was founded by and for Indigenous women. So I take a lot, I really want to recognize sort of the space that I take up in this conversation, right? Because a lot of the success and the movement in this broader movement of demilitarization has been really, brought to the forefront and led by Indigenous women here in the Marianas, right? And really, the OCW formed um, when the plans about bombing Pagan, one of our northern islands, was really brought into the fold. And a lot of these women leaders, I believe it was created during a women's summit here in the CNMI, and more women leaders were wanting to just talk about what are we doing, right? How can we fight against these plans and these actions, right? And so I really want to recognize them, right? Because I was not one of the founding members. I'm really just doing my part to carry this work forward into the future. And that's something that I feel like we all need to do. We're not always going to be here forever. And I'm hoping that the plans for military will also not be here forever. But then again, this is something that unfortunately is bigger than all of us, and it's going to take many of us across generations and time and space to really ensure that we're protecting our environment and our future. And so, with that, I would like to pass it over to our lovely colleague from Tinian, Leila. Go for it.
I don't know how to unmute. Okay, am I unmuted? All right. Hafide Zantiro, Guahu si Leila Fleming, Staffler, Guahu. I'm from the island of Tinian, and I currently live in Saipan. I'm a daughter of the Marianas. I grew up in Guam also, so I feel like I've lived everywhere except Rota, but that's still on my list of places to live one day. I am not involved as like a I am involved in many of the different groups that were mentioned today, except for Ginin Luta, Para Luta, because you just opened, but I want to be a part of your group too. But one of the through lines that I've found is that my involvement in all of these different groups is always rooted in my dedication to protecting our homeland. And also to ensure that our colonial masters don't win. But more than anything, I stay involved because I know that sometimes the promises of the past, the things that my mom and my grandparents agreed to when we became a Commonwealth, over the last 50 years that we have been in this relationship, I definitely see that there's a lot of things that I would question. And when I think back to the promises that my mom and my grandmother tell me about, I realize that the reason why there are so many questions is because of the language barriers that existed in the initial beginnings of this relationship. And I don't know if our elders would have agreed to what is currently happening today, considering they were people who were hiding in caves from bombing. I don't believe that they would agree to having these beautiful lands continue to host bombing activities, because that was something that they were also trying to avoid and hide from. And so the militarization topic, as you can tell, is very dear to my heart. I got involved in filmmaking because of the threat to bombing Pagan and Tinian, because those were happening at the same time. And growing up on Tinian in a place that is only 10 square miles of livable space that is not leased by the military, I often have felt like I have body dysmorphia, but island or land dysmorphia, because I know that my island is bigger, but I only get to use 1/3 of it. And so in all of those things are why I am continuing to be dedicated to this topic. And I'm very happy to be here today to share my experiences and connect with all of you and anyone that's out there listening to this podcast. We need more solidarity to continue to fight against these horrible actions. Thank you.
Jesus Masi Todo Hamzu. What powerful, powerful introductions. We're so honored to have you all. I know we just invited you next to share, about making waves, just as somebody who is co-founder, has done of MCCA, who has really paved the way for making waves to really pave the way to bring that to life, and has also been such a fierce fighter for our islands and protector of our islands, and want to also give space, sis, to share how you got involved in this work and really consider you a mentor of mine and a sister, and want to hear just sort of the origins of where your passion has come from around the protection of our islands.
Thank you. I didn't realize I'd be contributing in this way, but happy to. And so I have been so blessed to have spent really a lot of time throughout the entire of the Marianas. I'm from the island of Guåhan, but have some ancestral ties to Luta and have lived in Saipan for the last 4 years, and also spent a year living in Tinian. And so I have deep connections to the jungles and the beaches, and have spent lots of time being in community with folks throughout the islands, and have really expanded what it means to be Chamorro because of my experiences in the CNMI as a person from Guåhan. And now I like claim to be Tauta Marianas, and just knowing what Guam has lost in comparison to, let's just say, Luta. The first time I went to Luta, I was 20 years old, and I touched down and my heart just felt different just because of the sound of the birds, and being able to see Finihi in flight. And I felt, as someone from Guam, completely robbed of that experience. And I felt like my heart knew those things, knew those sounds, knew those animals. But because of militarization and the loss of habitat, and invasive species, we have lost so much of our biodiversity in Guåhan. And so that happened when I was 20 years old. I became a mother when I was 22. And since my son was born, and while I had him while I was pregnant with him, I also got to visit all the islands and was doing some research for my undergrad at the University of Guam. And yeah, I just became fiercely wanting to explore what Zeno was talking about on last week's Fanatsu, which is just the reunification of our islands and wanting to figure out ways to bring back our people culturally, if not politically, and really build community across our islands. And so I've been spending so much of my time doing that, and was lucky to be on Tinian in 2015 when the first EIS was dropped on Tinian for Pagan, and which outlined the atrocious plans for Pagan and Tinian, and was able to work with the Tinian Women's Association to really galvanize the community to say no to the horrible plans at the time to really transform Tinian and not make it really a hospitable place to live anymore, and to make it even more expensive to fly between Tinian and Saipan. And it's already really expensive, and it was then too. And just halt the plans for Pagan. And it was really wonderful to see the community unity in the Northern Marianas at the time in 2015 to fight these projects, because you didn't have to convince the folks in the CNMI that the land and the water are important. Whereas on Guåhan, doing a lot of work around the 2009, 2010 EIS that first claimed Pauget as a firing range, and then that later moved to 2015 to the Latexan fight. You had to do a lot of work just to convince people that the militarization is bad for the environment, and militarization makes it harder for us to just be native, and makes access to our lands that are important for farming, fishing, almond gathering really harder. So it makes it harder to just be indigenous on our lands. And I think because the CNMI has protections in place like Article 12, and because there are places that are just safeguarded in a way that Guåhan's not safeguarded because of our political status, there is just a stark difference between this level of stewardship and responsibility that people have towards the land, and which then in turn made people more down to be a part of the movement to protect Pagan, to protect Tinian, and to stop the militarization from happening at that time. Right now, we're in different economic conditions, and it's really different. The level of that sort of level of resistance is not the same within the CNMI, and there's a lot of welcoming of military projects, and I'm excited to hear from the panel, especially in Saipan and Tinian and Rota, to what their thoughts are on the sort of resistance that's happening, the need to, and what more needs to be done to continue to educate and activate and advocate for our lands and waters.
Beautifully said once again, sis Situs Maasi. Thank you everybody for sharing what brought them into this work. It really is a calling. It's not easy. You need grit to be able to respond to the violence happening in our region. Nothing about this is normal. Having the Marianas being transformed into the largest military training area in the world is not normal. And I think that continuing conversations like this keeps us from becoming desensitized. And so I'm grateful to have everybody here today. And I wanted to also pop, we gotta look make this local. Why are we popcorning? We're gonna pigigi this over to our Teihini. How did you get into this work, sis? And after you share, maybe you can jump into that into the first question. But go ahead, Chalu. Can you share a little bit about what brought you to D-Mill spaces?
Yes, I will do my best to try because it has been a while and it's one of those things that just happened organically. And I feel like it's one of those things that you can say like it found me. At first I thought that I found it and I discovered my passion within it. And which is also true to say. And also I wanted to make a picky joke of the instead of that, I was thinking more of Sarita's pak like pak packet to you, like pak. But okay, let's keep it professional as much as we can here in these trad streets. All right. So thank you for all of you guys, for all of our guests here, wonderful, beautiful guests with all these beautiful stories of how the movement has also, I'm going to say it again, I feel like we find it and then it also finds us. I believe that nothing is an accident and the people that we are such wonderful, heart-based, very dedicated, passionate people like us are bound to kind of find ourselves at this point in one way or another naturally, and that's how you kind of know that this is something that even like Mona said, we don't have all the answers all the time, but we're still learning, and we can't let that that acknowledgement that we have still yet a lot to learn discourage us from starting in the first place. You know what I mean? So I going back to my relationship with the movement and demilitarization and how I got into this work. It kind of for me started at a young age, but without the words and the ideas and the formal understanding of the world that we're in now to kind of conceptualize where this feeling of deep injustice was coming from. But I remember being a little girl and just driving in I get Sumai because I'm a South Side girl and we pass by that base quite a lot. It's right outside of or right outside of it. If you guys have known or been to Guåhan, there's a Taco Bell, and not too far from that is the Southern High School, my alma mater, where I graduated. So I've been around that area and that village for as long as I can remember. And I remember growing up and kind of not really knowing what was inside those naval gates. I was just kind of curious. That was my first introduction to like, oh, what is Guam? Like I didn't know what a US territory was. Even I didn't know that you can um claim ownership of another piece of land and tell those people how to live and all of that. So I was very young and kind of naive in that way. And ignorance is bliss, right? Until it isn't. And I've, like many of us, I have had family members who have served in the military. So I had that basic understanding or introduction to what that world was like. But I still wasn't fully, completely on board with like, waving the American flag and being that kind of patriot in that sense. I was very confused. And then I grew up and I learned that actually that naval base was built on a lost village called Sumai, that they drove out the natural or the native inhabitants of that village to create this base, which now they're using for, their own federal gain and whatnot. And that was, I feel, once I found out that that was what happened to that place, that I have also been curious, like, why haven't I seen that part of my island before? It feels so foreign. And even up to now, whenever I do, the rare opportunities or chances I do have or get to have to go on those that part of the island, it feels very foreign to me. And I don't like that because it doesn't feel like my home. It's like this is somebody else's idea of what my home should look like in those you know, in those gates. And so that kind of drove me to kind of at least know what that feeling felt like, but not really having anywhere to kind of put that energy towards action until I got much older. And then eventually our paths crossed when we did the hearing for the Texan and the firing ranges at the legislature. And that is where me and Chelu Maria first met, was back in 2017. And I would say that was my first real exposure to finding out like, oh, I can use my voice in this way that like is not just these silent injustices festering inside of me. Like I can actually do something about it and learn, you know, where it is that I can fit within this movement. And even up until now, I'm still learning that there are so many people on this group of panelists and beautiful people and guests on this show in this episode right now is evidence of that like, we are still learning, but we can't discredit that sometimes our even our passion should be enough too at the same time. You don't have to always have these backgrounds of credentials or different experiences for like a whole of your entire lifetime. You can, but that doesn't also, you can just wake up one day and be like, I want to fight for my people because this is not right. And something within your spirit will call you to do that. And I think however that happens for you is always going to be right. There is no wrong way to be an activist, in my opinion. There are so many ways and different forms of expressions and different types of personalities and different types of people that are all necessary and needed in each sector of the movement to be able to carry this movement in like the same Saipan, if that makes sense. We all have um our oars and our paddles, but we're moving in the same direction. And we're just learning, like, my paddle looks like this, my paddle looks like that. I got on this boat last year, I got on this boat 10 years ago when, I was jumping fences or, standing on the backs of the matriarchs before you, just kind of like protesting. So, yeah, long story short, that is my relationship and story and background. To put it, I don't want to say long story short. I hope that was short. But yeah, all that to say, I'm very, very grateful to be able to do what we're doing now with Telu Maria and all of you guys here, that were here from the panel in the inside pan for the conference. And it's just falling into place. And this is just affirming for everything that it's tying into of what this is about, what the point is, basically, at the end of the day. So, sana maasi, and I will pass it back to my beautiful co-host, Maria.
So important. Everything you've shared, Chelu, Sitsus Maasi, it's so true. Uh, we don't need fancy credentials. We all play our own roles in the movement. And a part of this work is really understanding that everybody has a role. Everybody is an activist in their own ways. And so Sitsus Maasi, thank you for sharing. And so one of the things that we wanted to highlight that feedback from some of the folks out in Making Waves is folks want to know about strategies specifically, like in the struggles to protect the sacred and our ancestral places. What specific strategies have been effective in reclaiming or defending them? I think I can just share a little bit, and then I can Teresa's buck it over to someone. But I feel like a lot of avenues in Guåhan have really been exhausted around build up projects and their impacts. We have had, consistent, the opposition has been consistent and resounding from the time that the agreement was signed between the United States and Japan to transfer Marines to Guåhan in 2008. There was already a resistance then, and there's a lack of free, prior, and informed consent from our communities around that decision because we didn't play a role. We didn't play a role in any of that decision. We learned about that news on national media. And so that's just an example of what it's like, life on a colony. living on and growing up on a colony, is these major decisions are being made on behalf of our people, and we don't have a say. So many strategies have been taken, petitions, protests, public hearings, meetings, outreach, solidarity, everything. And everything is so important in their own ways. But for me, what I've come to learn is that decolonization is key to make that change that we need. So I do want to give some time to our panelists to share as well, about some of the strategies that have been taken or are being taken now. And yeah, if folks can share, let's go ahead and Teresa's puck this over to Leila. Go ahead, Chalo.
Thank you, Maria and Teihini. Well, this strategy that was done by the Tinian Women's Association. My mom is one of the co-founders, and she was the signatory for the lawsuit that was waged against the military, the Navy in particular, regarding the EIS that was happening on Tinian. And that court case has already been decided, but while that outcome may not have appeared to be in our favor, I'm sorry, I don't remember the details just off the top of my head, but my mom is the expert. But what I know and what I have observed as someone who works in the government now and gets to attend certain meetings that maybe only, government officials get to attend, I totally have seen the strategy, or I've totally seen how the lawsuit changed the approach of the military in how they are coming to us now as these buildup activities are continuing to grow with the Tinian Divert Airfield being built currently. I remember attending this meeting and the people that were talking about the past plan, how it was this huge plan and it was so big and we threw everything but the kitchen sink. And, we never intended to do all of it. And in my mind, I was just thinking like, gosh, do you even know who your audience is? Like, you came to us and you were telling us you were going to do all these horrible things to our land and waters. And now you're saying, oh yeah, we didn't really mean it. Like, it just really didn't sit well with me. But what I can say, despite my feelings, is that the lawsuit was a great strategy that really did have to make them reconsider how they are working it. And the irony is my mom continues to be involved. She will show up to meetings unannounced and uninvited on Tinian oftentimes because they hear that the military are there and they'll just drop in. And in one of those meetings recently, she told me that the military gentlemen were telling her how the plans that they have right now are scaled back and they are connected. And that was her argument for the lawsuit all that time, was that they had the MIT, the EIS, there was the MIT, the MERC, the MIT, and the other one, I forgot the different acronyms. And in the lawsuit, they were claiming that they're all separate. They were all planned at different times and they do not connect. But at this now current meeting, she got confirmation that they do connect. They always were connected. And that was the crux of the lawsuit. So I don't know what would happen next if they pursued it again. But that strategy was definitely something that worked for how things are different now in the Marianas. It's not perfect, but it slowed them down and it changed their approach in how they're trying to come and do these things here. Passing on.
Yes, Auntie Deb, we love Auntie Deb. Such a hard worker for our islands, protector of our islands. And I remember reading the articles in 2018 that came out that said 2/3 of Tinian will be blanketed with ammo, and just, what was your reaction to that information?
Well, I didn't grow up on Tinian when there were bombing activities back in the 80s. But my husband grew up on Saipan, and he went to school on the side of the island that was facing Tinian. And he grew up, as a little elementary kid, feeling the sonic waves of the bombing come to Saipan as a child. And so when I heard that this Merc Mit stuff was going to happen, it made me think like, wow, we're going to feel those sonic waves again. Like this is real, because it's like the people here forgot what that felt like, and so immediately I knew that this was a really bad idea.
Absolutely. So devastating. And we're continuing the work collectively, united in solidarity across the islands to ensure that these plans do not move forward. Situs Maasi for sharing that strategy, Leila. I do want to ask you, Zeno, what strategies are you familiar with that have been effective in just creating that change?
Yeah, kind of in line with what Leila was saying, right? Is that, unfortunately, for a lot of our islands, a lot of these developments, like being in contact and dealing with the military's presence isn't a new thing, relatively speaking, right? But I think a lot of the issues come when we forget our history and what has happened before and how we have been negatively impacted before. And this is definitely not a perfect strategy at all. And also, this is definitely one that doesn't see immediate results, but it's something that we've been doing at OCW, which is really education is so key, right? So key. And it requires, a deep knowledge about, our history, what the military is actually doing, because it's actually a lot harder to find out what are the activities, right? We talk about, and also just having the, you know, intellectual capacity, not to even mention just the time capacity to pore over all these documents, right? But it requires, a lot of peoples and a lot of minds to come together to really make that digestible. And even when you make it digestible, it's bringing that out to people. But once you, cross those obstacles and those boundaries, people begin asking the right questions, right? And that could potentially, and I think has led to things like what Leila was talking about, which is in order for you to litigate, right, and do that, you need to be well educated on what is the issue and what are the questions you're asking, right? And so I think a lot of this revolves or centers and begins with education, right, first and foremost. And I think our people, unfortunately, our education system is very westernized. It's also, I would say, our public school education is very militarized, right? We have JROTC and ROTC in our schools, right? And although they're not necessarily, I mean, people can argue both ways, but, from my understanding, and I'll just put a little caveat, I was not in an ROTC program, so I'm not the expert in that. But as far as I know from family members who have been a part of the program, they're not necessarily um, overtly trying to have people like pledge their allegiance per se, but even just having um the presence of military style education and that discipline code kind of creeps in and normalizes and desensitizes our people to the military's presence and the military's actions. And so it's really hard when education is the critical component to be able to be the main strategy to reclaim our land and our environment. But when that key strategy is already infiltrated by the military, that's where kind of I think a big issue lies. And so it's not a perfect strategy, but I think it's one of it's a long-term strategy that we definitely need to consider and put more effort into as we continue navigating this space and this movement.
Zeno, for everything that you said. I really, really like that you chose to, it's very all-encompassing when you say education, because it can mean so many things, but especially in the sector of demilitarization, because I find myself in the same boat too, where I feel like the feeling and the passion of this rightful justifiable anger is there, but there's still room for me to learn more about, okay, why exactly am I mad? Like I know that they're doing something, but what exactly does this bill mean when they pass this? Or what is exactly when they have these policies, what does that mean for, so I can kind of best navigate and direct that anger, if that makes sense, towards that action where it actually makes sense and it's appropriate for the matters and the issues that we are rightfully upset about. I think that is very important, that lack of education leads to desensitization as well. And I also want to go back to like what Leila said also about like when I'm hearing the different strategies, and I'm very glad that we're getting all of your different perspectives. So, Leila had a more legal approach of like lawsuit strategies, and then Zeno, you are talking about educational strategies, and I feel like those things are very much in the same boat, that you can't have that legal action without that education, and then before that education is that passion where it just starts off first as your passion towards liberating, however, in whatever ways you can. So thank you so much for sharing. I would like to popcorn or pop it off to Mona to get their thoughts on this whole thing and expand on what they feel they can and would like to share about their strategies of combating um, the different things that we are facing today. And I know we talked about a little bit of this on the panel in the conference. So if there's anything, I forgot to say that before we started expanding on this, but if there's anything that you guys wish you had said, but didn't have time to say and expand on in the conference, then I would really love to invite that in your responses. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I echo all that Leila and Zeno have shared. And I think for me, I'm answering this question through the lens of someone who is new to this space and is still learning and figuring out like I guess kind of what my role is, and how do I support the work that has been going on for a very long time already, and those that have been on the ground. And we mentioned folks like Auntie Deb and those on this call as well who have been in this space much longer than I have been. But the two things that come to mind, and I know we also have some like comments and some feedback in the chat. But I'd like to challenge us in thinking of the strategies of relationship and curiosity. It's really hard kind of navigating this space when I think Teihini, you had mentioned having family members who are in the military, those who are serving. I do as well. And I know that since becoming a little bit more public in this space, I've heard people calling me radical or saying that you're anti-military, and like the narratives can get shifted and turned upside down really quickly. So for me, I bring those two strategies, which are more maybe even on an individual level, of relationship and curiosity. Relationship being that as I've returned home, and I continue to build trust and build relationships with folks on this call, those who are on the island of Luta, and hearing stories, whether it's collecting stories of what has happened in the past, like the story that you had just shared, Leila, about your partner and feeling the sonic waves, stories from our veterans themselves who continue to experience displacement, very poor and low quality healthcare, not having the access to a lot of the different supports that they more than deserve, having served our country.
I think Mona may have frozen. Is anybody getting that as well?
For me too. I hope she comes back.
Yeah, she'll come back.
might be an internet problem, or maybe her device died, hopefully not.
Here.
Still Bonita.
Oh,
Am I still here?
There you are.
yes.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Hi.
Where did I don't know where it ended.
Please continue.
Access to things that they should have access to because they are veterans. After
Yes. And then to the second part, which is inquiry and curiosity, as someone who is currently learning and unlearning, I've been asking a lot of questions myself to kind of be informed myself. And I think I don't want to speak for everyone on this call, but we're not trying. I know that at least in the spaces I've been in, it's never been about trying to impress or kind of put our beliefs to guide someone else's decisions and choices. But I encourage folks to be curious, to ask why systems are the way they are, to ask questions like why the CNMI and the Marianas as a whole has the highest percentage per capita of military enlistment of our young sons and daughters, cousins, sisters, brothers. Just kind of asking some of those questions. But I know that even in asking questions, there can be some hesitance of like, am I asking the right questions? But I think for me, that's a key strategy is looking to the resources that are already out there, the folks that are doing this work, and kind of coming up with your own understanding of what feels right for you in the place that you're at in this work. Because there's so much that's being done, it can be very overwhelming all at once. But I'd start kind of there with your own relationships and your own curiosities.
Simona, I think that is definitely where we are leaning more toward in MCCA spaces, is practicing that collective care and holding space for one another with the understanding that we are pro protection of our lands, pro clean water. Our lands are being destroyed for military built-up projects, and it's in the process, our lifeways are being affected. And so absolutely practicing care for one another is so important. And I wanted to ask, I know Teresa's fucking over to you a bunch when I just asked you to come and kind of share in the beginning, but I do want to hear your thoughts too on what strategies you think have been effective in reclaiming and defending our homes. And I know that there's some comments as well, some negative comments that we're getting, or a lot of positive ones, but sort of the same rhetoric we hear over the years about dependency on the military, and just really negative comment that we just read. So if you want to share your thoughts on that as well.
Sure. I think that there is this like false sense, and this is another one of the side effects of colonization, is just this idea that we can't survive on our own, and that we're completely dependent on outside forces for our own survival. And I just want to remind people that how long our history is and how beautiful and strong our culture and our ancestors are. The Chamorro people in this nation has existed for thousands of years before colonization and before the United States was even a nation. And so I think if we move from that place, then we'll be so much stronger and more informed, and also just more in alignment with the health of the environment. As much as the US is a major driver for our economy today, we also have to weigh the pros and cons of their presence. I think it's really important to know and study the environmental impacts and the health impacts of the military's presence. Guåhan alone has well over 100 Superfund sites, and we have across the Marianas, most especially in places where there's military presence, there's high contamination, and this contamination impacts our well-being. We see high rates of cancer throughout Guåhan, most especially on the villages that border the military bases in Santa Rita and in Jigo and in Tinian too, which has a really long violent history, especially during World War II of militarization. There's lots of different types of blood cancers and leukemia within the small community of Tinian. And so also in Tinopeg and in Saipan, there was PCBs and lots of dumping happening in the bay right outside of Saipan. And it was the Tinopeg Action Group that forced the military to do some studies and do some cleanup to the tune of, tens of millions of dollars in cleanup. But that was after so many people were getting sick and the community was wanting to see what, if at all, the military drums and the things that were left after World War II were contributing to that. So I think it's really important for people to remember that the health of, if we don't have healthy water and clean water, and military contamination to water is pretty prevalent almost everywhere they are. We see it at Red Hill in Hawaii. We see it in Okinawa and in so many other places where there is U.S. military bases, that the health of the water is degraded. And we're seeing that now on Guåhan with the Deleon contamination, even though it's not specifically linked to military, the likelihood is pretty high. Because that wasn't a pesticide heavily used by local farmers in the 80s when that was in primary use before the banning. And so it's just really important for our leaders and for our communities to be educated on what exactly the military is doing and have some sort of control and say over what can and should be done, because our future and the future generations are at stake. Insofar as strategies, I also wanted to share what Leila sort of shared of how the military has also shifted strategies in the way that they engage our communities. And Mona shared this at Making Waves in Saipan a few weeks ago, is that when they do these town halls, we no longer can speak to one another, and you have to give your comment either on a piece of paper or you share it in a small room by yourself. And so we are no longer hearing from one another. In the former EISs in 2015 and in 2018 and 2017 on Guam and throughout the Marianas, those spaces where we could have public comments and take the mic and share stories were incredibly empowering and powerful for us and our community to hear from one another. And a lot of people, it was their first time ever taking a mic and speaking in front of people before. And so it took a lot of courage for those who did want to share. And now we don't even have that forum anymore. And not only that, it's just that there's also that strategy of the military separating the projects and then just having an onslaught of all these projects where we're overwhelmed and can't even give comments to all the different things that come down the line. That's still very much in use. And so I myself have suffered from burnout after the 10 plus years of doing this work. And I think one of the major strategies that I've turned to is not necessarily doing that direct military engagement, which is project to project and writing comments and doing all these things, but it's really about building community power and coming back into the community to remind the community of our own worth and to remind people of the strength of our culture and our language and our traditions as something that we need to be turning to now more than ever because of climate change and because of the political conditions that surround us, that it's really important for our own survival, because it's what's kept us surviving and thriving in the Marianas for thousands of years, is to just return to that and move with those ancestral values that have been that have withstood thousands of years of this environment and hundreds of years of colonial violence. And so yeah, that's been one way that I have shifted strategies, is just looking more towards our culture as a solution and wanting to just connect more deeply with our people on our land, in our ocean, and doing more ceremonial work instead of in the face demilitarization work, which I definitely want to honor those who still do that strategy. It's such an important strategy to maintain and to be a part of that resistance. But I also feel like we need to be building the new and doing different things and just revitalizing ourselves and finding community spaces where we could build the trust instead of just have to be always moving in a state of urgency, which is what they want from us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Next, for bringing that up. I couldn't have said it any better myself. And in terms of especially what you said towards the end about centering those cultural values as a way to kind of ground yourself and your energy in the work that you do, because it's a lot, it's heavy. And like we have to be able to one of the things that we try to center in our intentions for the podcast is exactly that, which is the practices that we can return to that are more sustainable in this realm where we're dealing with such outdated, non-sustainable systems around us. Um, and we are reaching the end of our podcast time, but I did want to fit in our last question, which is perfectly in alignment, sister, with what you said of those strategies, those self-care strategies of what we can do as Indigenous people of the Marianas to kind of keep ourselves in check when these things get too much. And so I would like to ask our guests, just before we get off, I would like to hear from each and every one of you, maybe in like maybe 2 to 3 sentences so we can be respectful of our time, your responses to this last question. And I have it written down here so I can just make sure I'm succinctly and clearly communicating it. So, militarization impacts not just the land, water, and basically all of our resources, but also the collective well-being of our people. What practices of healing, grounding, or some or other form of self-care do movements in this day and age need to sustain a long-term resistance and resiliency? And then a second part of that question would be the practices not just on a collective level with your organizations, but also practices as individuals in your personal lives. And how does that differ or align with the cares that you feel would be wise to practice in your collective community? So I would like to popcorn it to Leila. And if you can just answer it in your best words of 2 to 3 sentences. If you
Very
need me to repeat the question, I'm more than
long
happy
answer.
to do that.
Honestly, I guess what I have been doing is getting more in touch with my roots and my culture, learning the language, learning about special places and sacred locations, learning about the traditions and just how we can be self-sustainable no matter what happens. And that's what helps ground me right now. Popcorn or pack.
We can popcorn it to Mona.
Yes, and this is such a beautiful question. I'll have to quote my brother actually, and it was a conversation we had earlier this year about like how do we, I guess, join community? How do we heal with community? And he quoted someone else, and it was along the lines of you start by peeling potatoes with each other. So for me, it looks like shared meals, feeding each other, storytelling, spending more time in the ocean, chanting, laughter, prayer. Healing practices are community practices, and these movements can't survive on just urgency alone, which I know we feel a lot, like a lot of things are moving really quickly, and we feel all the pressures, but they also require, rhythm and rest and reciprocity. So I think for me, whether that's on your own or with your family, your neighbors, your community, it's just being together and listening to one another and holding that care that we've been talking about.
Beautiful. I love that. Healing practices are community practices, and that rhythm, rest, and reciprocity bars. I'm saving that for a poem. I'm gonna credit you. I love all of these answers. All of these are beautiful. Maria, sis, would you like to chime in your own
I can
words
keep it
what you
brief.
practice?
Yeah, I just left Saipan for some work with a fellowship I'm doing with Right to Democracy, and just the presence of other like people who care about our lands and our waters just was so moving. I almost cried at the airport because we were literally, they didn't just send us off, they sung us off. We were getting just beautiful Presa Jos Estiki sung to us on the way to customs. So yeah, just really, really grateful for community, language. Hearing my nanny speak the language has been so healing for me. Just them being in the Hurrah charter school. Never thought in my wildest dreams 5 years ago that my nannies just would be able to speak to me and I'd be able to understand. I'll pack it to next.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I resonate deeply with all the things that have already been shared, whether it's returning to the land and returning to practicing feeding one another. There's just so many ways that I've been able to explore this over the years of doing leadership work with the movement, and also being in alignment with the lunar phases is something that I've really enjoyed doing. And my partner and I make coconut oil on the full moon. He's a fisherman too, so just being able to nourish ourselves from our waters and from things that my dad has planted, whether it's lemons or papaya. I just deepening that connection to our land and waters here on Guåhan and across the Marianas is something that has always been so nourishing and nurturing for me. And I would encourage everyone. Leila and I also did some agroecology work in Saipan where we were planting more. And so just doing that deep work of reconnecting to the land and to the water in any way every day. And the language as well. My nanny just started at Hurrah Academy as well. And so it's just been such a beautiful way that there's so many ways that we can do that remembrance work and that returning work. And one of the biggest things I feel is the Amit walks that Micronesia Climate Change Alliance has been able to foster. We've done 10 Amit walks and have worked with well over 1,200 people at this point of hosting Chamorro ceremonies, and also the Luta, which is another annual ceremony that happens around Tumaiguini, but really just reviving Chamorro spiritual practices that deepen our connection and set down intentions and prayers for peace and prosperity and protection across our islands has been incredibly powerful. And I feel like it unites people more than this militarization issue divides us. And so finding ways in which our community can find collective care in any way of our lands and waters has been so incredibly affirming for my existence. And I've just been really happy that it aligns with my lifestyle as well.
San bonito, sitos maasi. We're gonna close it out with Hini. Go ahead, sis.
Oh, the question for me now, or to close it off. Oh, sure. I'm happy just to be here. I'm happy just to facilitate. Um, I think laughter and humor, I'm very cheesy, so I do believe that laughter is medicine and healing is there's a lot of healing in humor. I'm a very jokester and very frijo and hee hee ha ha. I know there's always a time and place. You can always be comedian, you can always be, but I do feel like I love the laughing emojis just coming up in the chat. I really do feel like with such dark, heavy things that we are surrounded by on a day-to-day against our will, we have to kind of consciously make the effort to find the joy wherever it may be. And for me and for many of our people in the Marianas, it's very inherent in our culture and our people, going back to those cultural values, to be, comedic and have this lighthearted spirit of us in nature. It's kind of, I've always said, like, I'm a firm believer that caste culture has played a big part in our people's survival and revival throughout our oppressive history. And so I think that and sort of like art and music and creative expression and what you shared about how they were sending you off, Channel Maria, at the airport with that song, and just everything that all of us shared in one way or another. We are all like intertwined and interwoven and interlinked. All of these in one way or another will meet each other. All of these beautiful ways of like looking for the light in the darkest of times. So yeah, I find my joy and my sustenance and my sustainability and my healing in humor, art, music, and in my passion for people. Like just doing stuff like this. I really am just happy to be here. I love I've always been passionate about people and human beings and the energy and the synergy that we create when we are in spaces with my like-minded and like-hearted people. And so, yeah, that's what kind of keeps me in check and share, like Mona said, whether that's by myself, I can laugh by myself, and also just like sharing that laughter and that joy with our people who are also experiencing so many different hardships beyond what we can, comprehend on a surface level. I think that's a very good foundation, at least for somebody like me to have that balance of, knowing when to be serious and knowing when it's time to crack out the jokes and get moving in that way. But yeah, thank you for asking.
Thank you, sis. That's such an important lesson. We all need to cultivate joy. Um, and we'll kind of close it out with those words. Situs Maasi Todo Hamzu for your time. Thank you everybody for tuning in to this episode of In Solidarity. We hope to have one again in a few months. Please follow all the orgs mentioned to hear about all the hard work that we're doing over the next few months. There's a lot of outreach. There's a lot of programs and events and art shows and so much happening. So we'll ask Maget to share some of that in the comments. So Sitos Maasi Todo Hamzu. Thank you to our panelists. Love you